Hello, and thank you for attending WriteHive 2026. This panel is Avoiding Bi-Erasure, Writing Bisexual, Pansexual Representation. If you're here for something else, there's nothing else. So sit back and enjoy the show. My name is Poppy Alexanders. I write LGBTQ fantasy under the pen name AJ Alexanders, and with me today I have four fantastic panelists, and I'm very excited to introduce you to them. I've got Alethea Lyons, or Thea. Z is an indie SFF writer. Zia published works including the supernatural dark fantasy Seer of York series, published by Bridget's Gate Press. Their short stories can be found in a variety of publications. Z has a particular love for science fantasy, dark fantasy, dystopias, and folklore. She also has a soft spot for found family, hopeless romances, magitech, and non-human characters. Alethea lives in Manchester, UK, with her husband, Little Sprite, a cacophony of stringed instruments, and more tea than Z can drink in a lifetime. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm excited.
I also have with me Julie Liu. Julie loves all things fantasy and horror. The darker, the queer, the better. They are the author of adult gothic horror novel, The Wives of Herrick Hall, as well as the upcoming YA fantasy mystery, Death in Verse, which is coming out September 22nd, which is very exciting. She lives in the Pacific Northwest with her partner, and when she's not writing books about the magical and the monstrous, she's likely playing endless games of fetch with her Chihuahua Terrier mixed pup, Cody.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for being here. I also have Mia Moss. Mia Moss is a science fiction and fantasy author from the Pacific Northwest, now living in the San Francisco Bay Area. Their undersea sci-fi noir novella, My Ties for the Lost, is out now from Underland Press, and their short stories have been published in Cat Ladies of the Apocalypse, Starship Sofa, Galactic Stew, and elsewhere. Their debut full-length novel, The Heresy of Thieves, comes out in October 2026 from Dark Matter Inc. Congratulations on the publication. When they're not writing, they enjoy running around feral outdoors, rewilding gardens, building big art, DMing tabletop campaigns, mixing cocktails, and admiring their enormous TBR pile. Thank you so much for being here, Mia.
Thanks for having me.
And Paulette Kennedy. Paulette Kennedy is the author of 5 novels of Gothic suspense, including The Two Deaths of Lillian Carmichael, The Artist of Blackberry Grange, The Devil and Mrs. Davenport, and Parting the Veil, which received the H&S Review Editor's Choice Award. Her work has been featured in People magazine, The Mary Sue, and BookBub. Originally from the Missouri Ozarks, she now lives with her family and a menagerie of rescue pets in sunny Southern California, where sometimes, on the very best days, the mountains are wreathed in Gothic fog. Thank you so much for being here.
So much for having me.
Yeah. So I'm very excited about this. This is a panel that I've been looking forward to all summer. So let's go ahead and hop right in. So let's just start with the be-all end-all question that everybody asks, and I think we'll never stop talking about. But how would you define the difference between bisexuality and pansexuality? Let's start with Paulette.
I think that's kind of a tough one. For me, I feel like bisexuality is attraction to someone of any gender or either gender. And pansexuality is attraction regardless of gender. I refer to myself as bisexual because I've only ever been involved with cisgender people. But that doesn't mean that I'm closed off to the possibility of being involved with other gender identifying people. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Like I see this debate a lot this time of year about the distinctions between both, and I think there are lots of parallels, but I feel like other people are more informed about those differences and parallels. So I can't really give a definitive answer.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of fair, and especially now in June with Pride Month going on, when we're recording, you have a lot of people that are, oh, half the month is gay and half the other month is straight. So it's kind of funny. Mia, how would you define bisexuality as opposed to pansexuality?
Yeah, it is a really tough question to answer. I sat with that question a lot, probably the most of all the questions we have for this panel. I as kind of an elder exennial, I started my whole queer journey in the 90s as a teenager, and at that time I was really only exposed to the concept of bisexuality, and I don't think I even heard the term pansexual until the early 2000s. And that's not to say it didn't exist. Of course, it's just that's how sheltered I was. And so my formative process was, like understanding bisexuality means, one or like multiple genders, and pansexuality, like Paulette said, kind of incorporates like attraction regardless of gender. And so the more I kind of sat with both of those terms over the years, the more I feel like, well, I'm kind of a little bit of both. And yeah, like I'm non-binary. And so for me at least, bisexuality is like at least three genders, probably like any. So yeah, I just think there is a lot of overlap, and it can be super confusing. I think for even those of us who identify as it. And it's just yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, there is. How about Thea? You got anything to add there?
Yeah, I think I was probably even more sheltered than Mia was because it was a lot later that I heard these terms and a lot later that I came out. My husband actually outed me to myself, so I was already married by the time I came out even. And so I ended up sitting down and kind of going, well, what what flags actually apply to what I feel? And I initially went with pansexual because that idea of being attracted to people regardless of gender, like not having gender as a defining factor in your attraction, um, really fit for me. I am gender fluid. Another thing that I was since I was a kid, but I didn't have the words for until I was much older. And so, like on any given day, if we're talking about same or opposite gender, that could change whether someone is the same or opposite gender to what my brain is at that moment. So I really liked the idea that gender didn't have to be a factor, but also bisexual was the word that I knew. It was the word that I had heard more. It was the easy word for when talking to my elderly relatives rather than having to explain the whole new term of pansexuality to them. I could just say I'm bi and they basically understood that. So I really identify as both. I just tend to say bi more because I'm a purple person.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it also is a unique perspective for sure. Julie, is there anything you'd like to add to the definitions of those?
I mean, I agree with like everyone. Like for me, and I will just like flag that I feel like if like anyone is like struggling to understand like where they fit in a label, like labels are there to serve you. So like I think at the end of the day, it's like up to everyone to decide what that difference is and like where you feel comfortable. Because I definitely feel like I was that like teen that was like Googling like quizzes to find out like my sexuality. I wanted somebody just to tell me like a label, and that's like unfortunately not how it works, which is like both like frustrating as like a teen who just wants to know themselves, but also very liberating. So like for me it also like I am attracted to people of any gender, and I think that like pansexuality is like like gender doesn't play a factor in attraction. So yeah, like I identify as bi and non-binary, and I'm always like open to like experiences. I feel like I didn't know I was bi until like I go through life and experience like different things, and I'm like, oh, that is like a new fact about myself. That's exciting. So I'm like always open to like the experience of the journey. So that's why I'm so excited to like talk about like this representation in our writing.
I love that. And I think we've also kind of hit on this theme of like it's not a binary, I think, is I think where we're at. And I think Thea brought this up very beautifully, is that you can kind of be between both, and Julie too. So I think that that's a really interesting catch that we are all coming together on. Well, neat. Um, how do you guys avoid erasing your characters' identities regardless of their partners? Because in sometimes, especially on screen when you're writing a book, you have romance or subplots of romance where it's very clear, like clearly defined, this character is with this character. How do you make sure that that romance or however stays intact without eliminating their bi or pan representation or identification? We're going to start with Mia.
First of all, before I answer the question, Julie, I just want to say I love your jacket, and I'm having a hard time not staring. It's so cool.
Thank you. I like did it specifically because I was like, oh, like the right hive theme. I was like, let me get my space shirt out.
It's so good.
It's brilliant.
Mhm.
So to answer the question, yeah, so I have a character in The Heresy of Thieves. He's a knight and he is bisexual, and a core part of his character is this yearning for kind of a lost love who is a woman. And I wanted to make sure that that came across, like that relationship that they have like over the years. But at the same time, I really wanted to make sure that his bisexuality was also represented and not erased. And part of that is like he's very clearly like attracted to other people of both of any gender in the book. And I like there's in any of the chapters where it's from his point of view and his interiority, the way that he describes meeting other people of like male or female, like if he is attracted to that person, it kind of comes out in the way that he is internally like thinking of that person. So that was one way I made sure to do it. Like I just wanted to be clear that his attraction is a bisexual attraction. Like that's just his way of being. And also just in general with my books, I think that the biggest way that I try to avoid erasing my character's bisexuality is just to make sure that if they do end up with someone, and not all of my stories even really like, even if the character is bisexual, there's not really like a romance or a sexual nature to the story, so it doesn't always necessarily translate. But when it does, I try to make it clear, like if I do have a character that, you know, like if I have two women characters and one or both of them is bisexual and they end up with each other at the end of that story, I try to make sure that it's not like, and now they are lesbians, they've picked their path or something like that, where like I have read stories that kind of go that way, which is unfortunate, but like just making it clear to the reader that this isn't the end of their journey together, or like the fact that they are together doesn't take away from their own personhood and their own identification as bisexual.
Yeah, that's very thorough. Thank you so much. I think it's interesting that you're using like the use of internals is really important with writing too. So I think that's a really good take. Thea, how would you avoid erasing your character's identity regardless of their partners?
Well, I think I really like what Mia was saying about the fact that whatever relationship they're in, it doesn't change what their sexuality is. So going into a relationship where they are with someone of a different gender or a same gender doesn't make them any less bi, because I think that is something that can be a problem in real life for people who are bi or pan. And so it's very important to me to make it clear that they haven't changed their mind or settled into anything. It is a case that they are just being themselves, and this happens to be the person they've fallen in love with, which is not because of their gender. They've fallen in love with them because of various other factors of things that they share, enjoyment they have, things they do together, and that they're not picking a side. But I also really liked one of my characters recently came out as bisexual in a book. And kind of following my own path, this was something that came to her later on. So she's in her mid-20s at this point, and she has this long conversation with her sister about it, of basically reaffirming and them discussing that these are her feelings and these are the feelings her sister has had since her sister was younger and already knows how to deal with. And I like that idea of having a confidant who you can still speak to and who recognizes all aspects of your personality. So I really enjoyed writing that way. And I also sometimes use history. Like obviously not all people who are bi or pan have dated someone of a different gender. And not having done that doesn't invalidate them being bi or pan. But also because I write bi-normative world, a lot of my characters in their dating history have dated someone of different genders. And so sometimes that will come up, or those people will still be friends in their lives or run into because they're still in the same location. So you can say it without saying it just by those introductions.
That's really good. And that's there's a lot of points there that you touched on too. So that was very thorough. Julie, how do you avoid erasing your characters' identities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are like two like, areas that like characters like, could be erased. And I think that's like, at the writing level, as like an author, and then kind of like at the reader level. And I think kind of just like as in real life, all that we need to do to accept bi and pan people is believe them and their like sexuality. When they say they're bi or pan, you don't make any assumptions or, in your head, like correct that and erase that by like assigning them a different like orientation. And I also think, because I think about this a lot, especially in terms of like, when you write like specific like romances where people want to put it into like it's lesbian or it's straight, and I at the end of the day, like I couldn't write my characters and who they are, and I can't take on the burden of representing all of bisexuality like in its entirety and like these two people. Like that's just not possible. So I think just kind of letting that go, but letting them be true to themselves. And like Thea was, talking about, like I also write in a historical context. And sometimes, like especially like in the pointing to the wrong side of the screen all the time, but in the Wives of Herrick Hall, like the characters, it takes place in like 1799, and like the characters like historically don't have like the vocabulary and the terminology that we have today to describe themselves. So it was definitely like thinking a lot about like how could they talk about themselves like in a way that felt right to the time period, but like they are not going to like erase themselves from the page. And it took like a lot of revision, and I just wanted to like whenever like I wanted it to be important in both my books that when you like have these romance arcs, that the characters are like very upfront right away, being like, this is who I am, and then just like having the care like the person they're with, or just like as the author like believing them, and and I think that there's also that onus on like the reader too, of like if someone says they're bi but they end up in like a straight passing like relationship, that doesn't mean they're straight, and you just you believe that. And like if you want a different type of representation, then hopefully we just need to keep publishing queer stories, so there is a whole breadth and spectrum of representation in like the queer books that we read and publish.
That's awesome. I like that you're holding the reader almost accountable to believe the character. I think that that's really important too. Paulette, how do you avoid erasing your characters' identities?
My similars are my answer is kind of similar to Julie's in that, so I write historical fiction. So a lot of times it wasn't safe for people to be out. And so I tend to convey their bisexuality through like the gaze, like how they describe other characters. And this is kind of where it started for me too, like realizing that I was bisexual was the gaze. Um, the gays and the gays, but just seeing like admiring other women in a way that transcended just like looking at their beauty, like realizing that that was something more. And so there's a lot of that in my books. There's a lot of yearning. There's a lot of reminiscing over romantic friendships. There's a lot of romantic friendships in my books because historically those were, while I won't say they were common, they were more accepted in a historical context, while these relationships probably went deeper than that in all reality, like Boston marriages and things like that were very common in the Victorian era. So I convey my character's bisexuality through a lot of methods and avoid erasure that way. And there's some coming out that happens in some of my books, like in The Witch of Ten Mountain and in The Two Deaths of William Carmichael, kind of touching on what Julie was saying. Like the terminology didn't exist for gender fluid. One of my characters is gender fluid in 1853, but I convey that through the way that, and their pronouns are she and her, but that was because of the time period. If Kate existed nowadays, Kate would identify as they probably. So there's a lot of like historical context that goes into how I write my characters and how they present with their queerness, but ultimately they are queer. And if someone reads, and especially if another queer reader reads my work, they pick up on it pretty quickly.
I think it's interesting what you're saying about the reader side of it, Paulette and Julie, both of you, because it makes me think I have a book that beta readers have come back to me and been surprised that one of the main characters wasn't straight, because at the start of the book, the relationship that he is in is with someone who is non-binary, and they have a gender-neutral name, they use non-binary pronouns, and despite this, people would just assume that he is with someone who was AFAB, who was assigned female at birth, and therefore are then surprised when he's bisexual later. I'm like, but that is the reader assumption about what the history of that person is.
Yeah, and that's like also another form of erasure too.
Mm-hmm. So I still haven't entirely cracked it in terms of I'm trying to work out how to write it to make it clear without smacking someone in the face.
Yeah, it looked like you wanted to add something to that. Am I wrong?
Oh, no, I fully agree. Yeah.
Do I like that too? Because especially when we're dealing with like genre labels like sapphic and Achillean, it can be very difficult, especially to position ourselves in a marketing standpoint when we're trying not to avoid, or when we're trying to avoid this erasure. So I like that you guys are kind of using these methods to kind of put your readers in that position to be like, no, 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 think about this, and you challenge them. And so I think that that's important. Um, so how do you balance their identity without making their whole personality? Let's start with Julie.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think it goes back to the idea that you can't represent everything. So like you gotta focus on your story and your character and like what it needs. I like my two books coming out this year both have bi representation, but like the level of like, how thematically like, prominent it is in the book like varies because each story needs something different. Um, and I think it's just focusing like on the characters and, you know, if I wanted to write, about this and I wanted it to like to be so direct and like hit the reader on the head with it, then write something else, write an essay, like give a lecture. But I just like focus on what the characters, who they are, what's right for them, and then like how much I thematically like discuss it or explore it. It's very like story dependent. Like in Herrick Hall, it's like much more prominent because like thematically it's like the book explores kind of like the systemic like oppression of like how the systems that we live in are kind of like designed sometimes to keep us from knowing ourselves, and like they take the language away from us for like giving us the ability to like know ourselves and like find that self-empowerment. So like obviously I explore it a lot more, but it never defines the characters. Like the characters experience like shows it more than like I take the experience and try to like put like ram it in like the reader's face like every page. And then like in Death and Verse, it's like it's a more like plot like driven, like there's like then the character side is like more like based on like other things. So like it's an important part of the characters, but it's like not as prominently like explored as in like Herrick Hall. So I think like long story short is I feel like it's very like story and character like dependent. But I'm so curious because I felt like I sat with this question a lot thinking about it. So I'm so curious like what everyone like else like thinks.
Yeah, me too. Paulette, do you want to tackle that one?
Well, I really like having mostly bi people existing in the world and just being bi people without it like being the thematic thing that the story hinges on. But I also recognize like a couple of my stories, as I mentioned, are coming out stories. So that's like part of, or coming of age type stories. So that's part of it, is this character internalizing and questioning their sexuality and coming to terms with who they are as part of their identity. But like, I don't necessarily write issues books. So like my stories are really incorporating the bisexuality within the characterization without making it the whole point of the story. And I think in The Artist of Blackberry Grange with Marguerite, who's bisexual, it's just who she is. And she's very much of a like a progressive type character for the time period, the Gilded Age and then into the 1920s. And she just like, this is just who I am. And she's an artist, and she forms relationships with lots of people. She has lots of lovers. Her lovers are a major part of the story, and each one of them impacts her life in a different way. And so she's going through the story and she's talking about her experiences with each of her lovers. And it's just part of who she is. But I think it really just depends on the story, like how much of the character's sexuality impacts the plot.
Awesome. Mia?
Yeah, I experience it a lot in the same way, in similar ways when I'm writing my characters. Like I I've never written a character that it was kind of like coming of age or exploring that part. I might at some point, but most of my characters are more like firmly like they've been past that point and now they're kind of like exploring other parts of their lives, and their bisexuality is just part of who they are. I do explore though, like I think that it's really important to figure, like, depending on like what aspects of like culture and community you're trying to get out into the story. Like I do have works where the bisexuality is more prominent because the story deals with class and who is allowed to express who they are, and who isn't. And so in those stories, the bisexuality is more to the forefront because they're struggling with like not being able to present themselves as they truly are versus someone who is. But in, for instance, the novel that I have coming out this year, the characters, it's a queer norm world. There's not a lot of that, like that danger that we can face in the real world. And so it's just more like kind of fluidly part of that character as any other part of their background. And so it's not as touched upon prominently. So yeah.
Gotcha. So your work also talks about class, which I think is an interesting point that I kind of want to touch on here in a little bit. But let's go ahead and move on to Thea.
I mean, if you want to, you go ahead. But
Well, I did think it was kind of an interesting like point of you're engaging with this idea that the safety, I assume, of the sexuality of your characters is class dependent. And I think that that's really fascinating because I feel like we do have some of that in our real world, in our day to day. Would you agree with that? And what does that look like? I guess we'll go with Mia.
Yeah, I firmly agree with that. I think that in the real world, I mean, like there's so many cultures in the real world, of course. So it's gonna differ and depend. But even here, on in America, like there's definitely like a level of power and privilege that allows you to fully express who you are and your sexuality. And not everybody has that. And so there is a danger level there. And so when I am telling stories where there is a lot of class inequality, I definitely end up kind of like exploring how they are able to present their sexuality a lot more.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really good. So yeah, I'm going to throw this question, the how this manifests in like today's world, before I come back to the identities question, if that's all right with you.
no, I think it is class specific. Here in the UK, there's definitely if you are on, I think, either end of the spectrum of class, it is something that is probably more dangerous than if you're in that middle section, just because of the mentality people have. And that's towards gender as well as sexuality, I think, because there are certain stereotypes that you're expected to be as a woman or as a man. And part of that is that you will be attracted to people in a certain way. And there's not then that accommodation for being bisexual or for being demi or ace or anything that is considered different to what your grandfather and your father and your grandmother and your mother were. And it extends into so many things. Like, I live in quite a working class area. And they recently started talking about having a community hub where there will be like theatre and art classes and other things like that. And lots of people were commenting saying, stop trying to make us less working class. We can't have theatre and art classes. Who do you think wants those? And I was like, excuse me. Have you met Lowry? Have you met all these people who came from poorer backgrounds? And I think that sometimes there's that gut reaction to sexuality and gender as well, of you're coming in here with these other ideas and we just want to stick with this tradition. And that's on the upper end of the scale as well. If you go into, particularly where there's that issue of hereditary and people want to pass things along to their children, and to have children who are fully biologically both of your children involves having someone who has the ability of a man and the ability of a woman to make a child. And so the idea is that even if you are bi, you are expected to marry someone with whom you can have biological children, which was quite an interesting thing I've spent a lot of time on because I write queer normative worlds. And one of the worlds I was writing does have that rigid monarchy and nobility. But I wanted it to still be a queer normative world so that you could be gay, lesbian, bisexual, etc. And then working out then how that hereditary element worked so that you still had the right of kings and the biological passing along, which like you'll never see on the page. I think there's like one or two sentences where it's briefly related to, but I have this whole system worked out.
Like the whole lineages and everything. And wow.
And how families can relate to each other in these arranged marriages to ensure the correct bloodlines and everything.
I want to see that web. Do you have it drawn out?
Yeah, just stick it on the wall as a poster.
Right. Julie, how would you tackle that one?
I mean, I feel like 100% like affects, that a character's experience just as it does to like, people in the real world. I feel like, in terms of like Herrick Hall, class is definitely like, a thematic like issue. Like they're in this house and there's this idea of the patriarchy and like kind of like the male line and like continuing it, and how, people like, so like the bi, like one of the bi characters in my book, her name is Nora. Like she like doesn't like has gone through most of her life being told this is who you are, this is what you want. So she doesn't, and it's not until she meets like the main character Josephine that she realizes that she is bi. And but it still doesn't, stop the fact that like her purpose in the world is to have like her husband's children and to like continue the male line. And kind of like all the women in the book, like that is their role until it reduces them to like nothing. And like I think that, yeah, there's a lot of talk about like in terms of like power and gender, and it's like all like, we are all the product of like, the societies that we grew up in, and like kind of like the power or not that we have to be, out openly, to be fully ourselves publicly, is like, is all like a mishmash. So 100% it plays a vital role.
And I think especially with historical fiction too, because you are playing with these themes that do exist and did exist. So it is an interesting like angle to tackle it from. Paulette, do you want to add into that?
Sure. So I think like in my book, Parting the Veil, which was my debut novel, I have a character, and class is very much an issue in that book because we have an American heiress that goes to England during the Gilded Age. and is looking to marry a British aristocrat. And she's bisexual and she marries a man, but one of her best friends in the book is in a lavender marriage. So the friend is a lesbian married to a gay man. They both know this, but they're in the aristocracy, and they basically, the expectation is to marry your opposite gender. And there's a lot of discussion between this character named Sarah and my main character, Eliza, about what that looks like in 1899. And it was really fun to write those characters, and class is very much that. I also think too, like just in general, and this has kind of been my experience as a bisexual woman who has been married to cisgender men, there's a privilege there that not everyone who is partnered with a same-sex partner experiences. And it's that whole heteronormative passing thing that does give a certain degree of safety and privilege in certain situations. And I don't think we can really ignore that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also, I think in addition to that, the privilege of a gender too, with especially cis women, I think have a much easier timing. At least as long as they're in a heteronormative situation, they have a lot easier coming at like easier, in quotations, than say their cis male counterparts or their queer counterparts. So it is interesting to kind of see like these differences both in class and also through gender. Thea, I do want to go back to the balancing your character's identity with their personality. Are you still okay tackling that, or do you want to? Okay.
So for mine, part of it is because I write queer normative world, and I think this is the advantage of writing contemporary and futuristic fantasy. I don't have to deal with the problems that Paulette and Julie have had around what's anachronistic, what language fits, what can people say in this time period, because I can just go, it's fantasy, it's contemporary, it's fine. And I deliberately write queer normative world because there's so many other bad things happening in these worlds, and I want it to be that certain bad things in our world aren't necessarily as strong there. So there's less racism, there's less homophobia, because we've got these other problems. In the case of the Seer of York books, of which, oh, I got the right side of these ones. Magic is illegal, and people who have magic are looked upon as suspicious and different and not allowed to exist, essentially. And you can apply that to any of the phobias we have in the world today without me picking out one of them to talk about. So I didn't want to have the plot overshadowed by lots of other things coming in. And because I like writing queer normative worlds, I feel like there is so much struggle for the queer community, whether it's through having to come out, through direct hate and homophobia, through erasure, that I wanted something that was natural. And so it's never that big focus of the queerness of the characters. Books 1 and 2, you will notice it in that there are some characters who introduce themselves using non-binary pronouns. There are a couple of characters who comment like, oh, I'm going on a date with someone of the same sex tonight, but using their name, obviously not saying that. So it's there very subtly, but because the focus that I wanted to have was on sibling relationships, that is what we see the most of. And even in book 3, where we have these two romantic subplots and this bi coming out, and another character's experience romance for the first time because he's demi and he's just never encountered this situation before, the focus is still on the sibling plots. And these are just parts of these characters' personalities, and they deal with them with talking to their siblings and getting that support from their family.
So, Thea, I have some more questions about this, especially with as you're getting into like a queer normative situation in your books. And so there's, a lot of discussion about culture and very specific culture. What would you say your responsibility as an author is to informing your readers about bisexuality and pansexuality, especially considering your use of this greater cultural, overarching theme, and also how because we all bring our own culture into it, how do you handle that mix?
So for me, it's very much about normalizing and taking away the otherness of being bisexual or being queer, but also specifically bisexual in that sometimes there can be an otherness from both sides that people feel, especially if they're in one type of relationship or another. They might feel that they are not fully part of either community. And I really want to have things normalized, especially with the family aspect. So there's not this case of you have to worry about whether your family will accept who you are in either direction. And I feel kind of like I want to show these worlds where it's normal for people. And it's very good that we have books where there's struggle and that are highlighting what people actually go through in real life. But I also wanted to have a bit of escapism and this to be a while where you don't have to worry about it. And also, if you're a reader who isn't bisexual and isn't kind of used to that reality, that it's not really on the nose and it still feels like a story you can read, but it's gently introducing you to it. And the same with gender. Because I use neopronouns, obviously not many people understand my pronouns. And so there are minor characters in my books in this series leading up to another series where it's a main character who use those pronouns. And I think it's all just about letting people know this isn't something weird. The actual idea that this can be normalized one day exists. We don't always have to be something different.
That's such a powerful note to end that on. I love that. Julie, what responsibility do you have in informing your readers?
Um, I mean, I agree with like everything Thea said, especially in terms like of like, queer normative worlds and like otherness. Like, because obviously Hair Call deals a lot with kind of like when you find yourself like opposed to like the system and like what do you do? But with my YA Death in Verse, like I definitely dealt, with a lot with like what Thea was talking about, where like this is like a book for teenagers and it's in the 1920s, like alternative America. It's also a fantasy. And one of the main characters is non-binary. And I had a lot of like thought of like, well, time period wise, like how would they have referred to themselves? Like, how do we deal with this? And I just realized at the end of the day that I didn't want to be such a stickler for history that I was erasing that character from the page, especially for like a book that I'm hoping will like resonate with like queer teens. Cause like I wrote it for like the teen that I was, where like, I didn't know that being non-binary was an option. And like I thought, like I definitely think, it's there's like a world for both. And I'm so excited that we have like such a spectrum of like representation in books. And then in terms of just like what responsibility we have to informing readers, I I love talking about like the queer rep in my book because I want to find and connect and talk with like other queer authors and queer readers, or for to find readers who are looking specifically for that representation. But I also think there's like a flip side to like be careful about, where I feel like there's a lot of like discussion about like whether like queer content needs like warnings and labels, and like if somebody encounters like a queer like storyline in a book, they're like, oh, like I was duped, like this is terrible. Like I think that there's like also like we don't need to be a warning. We don't need to be like flagged as like something like wrong or something bad to like for people to avoid. So I think that is like trying to like spin on the positive, or like I want to connect with people. And certainly if there's bigots out there, I just don't want to engage. So like if that sends them away, fine. But I also do think there's like this is a concerning thing where people will read books and then find queer storylines and then just go whoa whoa whoa, and then go on like the internet and like being like I was tricked into reading about gay people. And I think that like you just have to be careful. Like I think there's a positive, and then there's also just like it's not like a worrying trend I've been noticing.
Julie, if you've had those comments on your things, how do you handle those?
I honestly like don't I'm not on those spaces. Like I have had like I've like definitely seen that for like other like people's books and I've like talked with authors who've dealt with that, but I realized very early on that my mental health would be very like tied to like what I was reading about what people thought perceiving me. So I have like I like deleted Goodreads. I don't go on those things. Like I know a lot of people say that and they really do, but I legitimately know for my mental health that I should not be in those spaces. And I also feel like, for legitimate, like non-bigoted reasons, people don't have to like my books, and that's totally fine. And they deserve a space that they could talk about that. And I don't want to be like intruding. But I have been very conscious because I feel like if I did like confront that, I don't know how I would navigate it. And I just I don't want to put myself in a position to like be like engaged with like, bigoted people. So honestly, I guess the answer is I'm not sure how I navigate that.
No, I think that that's fine. And I think it's also important as authors to recognize that. And you're very, I like your honesty in that and the fact that you're holding yourself accountable to maintain your mental health, because I think a lot of us do, I think, take it a little personally, as especially at first in early career. So I think that that's very smart. Paulette, what is your responsibility as an author to inform your reader?
Well, like Thea was saying, I think it's important to normalize queerness, but also, since I write historically, also represent queerness culturally and historically in an honest way. And I'm from the American South, I'm from the Ozarks. And so being queer wasn't very safe for a lot of people. It's definitely better now than it ever has been. But in The Witch of Ten Mountain, which takes place during the Great Depression and also the Gilded Age, I wanted to show that honestly. So my characters do encounter, especially my two male characters who are in a relationship, and they're also in a biracial relationship, which was very forbidden during that time period in that area. I do touch on the dangers without making it the focus, without it being the trauma. And to kind of piggyback on what Julie was saying, like the whole content warning conversation, I definitely don't think our books need content warnings for the queer content. You see that in reviews from people who are bigoted a lot, that they don't like being blindsided. At this point, I feel like if anybody picks up my books, they need to expect queer content. Like if you don't want to see that, don't read my books. I don't actively go looking for reviews. I've been in this career long enough now that I have had people come into my yard and yell at me, which is basically through DMs or emails about my books. And I just either don't respond to them, or I graciously thank them for reading my books, and then I block them. Because you just really, it's very difficult to engage with somebody in a way that is going to change their mind, for one thing, and also in a way that doesn't reflect poorly on you. So I really try to just not engage, and then I just get that energy away from me in whatever way I can. But yeah, I think that my books aren't always marketed as LGBTQ plus, like in the tags and such. So there are still some people that are new to my books who pick up my books and they find the queerness in them and it offends them. That's not my problem. That is a them problem. And so I think it's really important to know yourself and to know what you want to say with your books, and to not shy away from saying what you want to say, but also recognizing that you're not going to be for every reader, and that's okay.
That's fantastic. Hey, Mia, you're up next.
Yeah, I think that I view my primary responsibility as an author on this subject to just try to be as authentic to myself and my characters as possible in the story and the story itself. And also to try, just like, I think as it was touched on earlier in the panel, about there being a responsibility for the readers to sit with your work, and really we can't like control how they take our stories and how they react to them and what they take away and what they kind of ignore. And I think so for me, the responsibility is just trying to make sure that I do as little harm as possible too. And we all have our own kind of internalized this or that or biases or whatever. And a lot like the process of writing a lot of times, right, is a conversation with ourselves and an exploration of something that we're kind of processing internally. And so at the end of the day, if there's a story that I'm putting out there for the public, I want to make sure that whatever I have put into that page internally is as authentic as possible and is doing as little harm as possible to our community.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. I like all of those takes. I think that was very important to hear. So maybe let's come back a little bit from, I think, the heavy and come down to our tools. So what tools have you guys developed when writing to reference the sexuality of your characters? I know that we've talked a little bit about the use of internals, using side characters and history. Do you have any specific like notes that you would recommend to new authors and how to tackle this? Let's start with Paulette.
Well, I think if you're writing historically, there are a lot of really great nonfiction resources out there that you can consult about what queer living as a queer person was like in the past. And some of those are like biographies and memoirs. I don't have a bibliography in front of me of books that I've consulted, and my mind is a little blank on that right now. But I have, and it really is beneficial to hear what it was like from that person in the past point of view, just living day to day as a queer person. Just in general, I feel like really knowing who your characters are. I think characterization is so important, and deep character work is knowing what the lies they tell themselves are, knowing what their goals are. And I think no matter if your character is queer, straight, however they identify, if you know them, you're going to write them authentically. And I think it really comes down to knowing their voice.
Yeah, I love that. Mia, how about you?
Yeah, I 100% agree with like it really comes down to the character and their voice. And so the tools, like I did say, I used a lot of like the internal dialogue to kind of I use that a lot just as the framing of that character's point of view, just because, you know, when we're looking through the world or at the world through our own eyes, we will pick up on very different things that someone standing next to us will completely like overlook or see in a very different way. And so when I have a book that has multiple points of view, I always try to be really careful about that, like embodying that character as I'm looking at the world through their view and then the next character through their view. And so I think a lot of their sexuality will come through in just that perspective. But I also, you know, in the general broader sense of world building, I try to just kind of really paint with a subtle brush on like what is normal for that world, and what is kind of being pointed out as abnormal. And so if there's a queer norm world, people in that world aren't really going to be like, and that person is a lesbian and that person's bisexual, because it's just normal. They don't even really think about it. Whereas like there's other aspects of the world that they will point out as being abnormal. And again, a lot of my work deals with class stuff. So like if someone is you know, of a lower class and an upper class setting, that would be something that people would be like, what are you even doing here? Versus the queerness or the bisexualityness or, you know, the whateverness of that person's orientation is just kind of enmeshed in the general background noise of that world. Yeah.
Excellent. Thea, what tools do you have?
And again, just I agree very much with what Paulette and Mia are saying, and particularly around, as you say, having that character voice and having that world building. And I think it's really important to think like Mia was saying, about what the wider picture is. So it's not just how do you view it, but how does that have the bigger effect on society? And sometimes that can make things a bit easier because, especially with this queer normative world that I'm writing, it means that there isn't the friction in the world and there isn't going to be funny looks or comments from people if there are two boys going out together holding hands, for example. But it can also be an erasure problem in and of itself because, for example, I've had difficulty trying to show that my worlds are transnormative, and that because if you say my pronouns are she, her, then everyone just uses that and no one's thinking, are they really? Have they changed it? Because nobody cares about that. You are whatever you say you are, and people are happy with that. So I've had to come up with wider world building ways to try and show that these people still exist. And I think there's also intersectionality to think about. Paulette, you were saying, pardon me, you were saying earlier that um, you have to think about the additional difficulties of having a biracial couple. And my books are very deliberately, my characters are from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. And again, I've had to think about how does that intersect with them being queer? How does that intersect with my alternate world history, in that their grandparents or further back have come to the UK from somewhere else where they have a different belief system? How does it intersect with the religion in my world? Because my characters follow several different faiths, and that's something they're very open about and is talked about on the page. And obviously, being queer and religion has a fractious history in some cases, shall we say. But I didn't want that. I wanted to be able to show both being spiritual and being queer as positive things and things that could fit harmoniously together. So again, it was thinking about that wider world aspect of how is this shown and what differences will there be in the world because of it.
Right. Julie, what tools do you have?
Yeah, I mean, just like echoing what everyone has been saying. I think there's like so many like, incredible like different approaches to it. I think like also if you're like, starting out as a writer out there and you're like, you're struggling with this, like how do we do it? I think that like, one thing that I'd advise that like has been really helpful for me is just kind of like sitting back and like wondering what my own experience, like, understanding my sexuality has been, and it started out, very like interior, with a lot of interiority, like, grappling with like, things and thinking about it before being ready to talk about it, and like trying to like, bring those experiences and like digging deep to like make your characters like feel more real. And I think that how like what like voice you're writing in, if they're like a main like perspective character or not, like, and then how do you like piece that in so it's like understandable by readers? Like, for instance, in Harriet Call, like Nora, the whole book is first person from the other the main character Josephine, but it's like the Josephine like knows, like she like knows she's queer, but it's like Nora who goes on this experience of kind of like realizing that like there's more to the world than that she and herself than she knew. And so I struggle with like how do I show that without going into her head. And like a lot of it like went back to like thinking about like, well, when I was struggling with it, what are the physical manifestations of that like journey? And like I think like that was why I had such fun writing her, because I think like she starts out as a really like horrible person. Like you don't like her at first. And I love when like readers message me that they hate her. And then by the end of it, they like fell in love with her and they were rooting for her. And I think that like at least in my head, like one of the reasons why like I really like took to writing that arc was like because like you had to ground it in her like struggle and like feeling a powerlessness, like coming to terms with her like queerness and like her role in life. And a lot of that was rooted like in like my experience, like, growing up in a like a more, traditional household where that wasn't okay, that wasn't expected. Like, I wasn't even told that like queerness was a thing until I was a teenager, and I like stumbled upon it by accident. So like that naturally led to like a lot of like, friction and like lashing out and like, moments of frustration. So I like tried to like bring that and ground that in Nora. And I think that that's what allows that shift of like thinking she's horrible to really understanding and empathizing with her. So I guess long story short, my advice would be just kind of like look inside yourself and like your own experiences and like how you can bring that across on the page.
Excellent. Well, this has been great, and I think that those are a lot of really fantastic tools to give our viewers. Um, so this has been a lot of fun. We are nearing the end of our time. So where can people find you if they want to engage more in this conversation, or if they're a little bit more shy to ask questions after this panel is recorded? Where can people get a hold of you? Paulette, if you don't mind starting with you.
Sure. So I'm most active on Threads and Instagram, and my handle on both places is at P Kennedy Writes. I also have a newsletter that I pour a lot of time and attention into that goes out every month, and you can find that on my website at paulettekennedy.com.
Excellent. Mia, where can people find you?
I'm most active on Blue Sky, and my handle is at magicrobotcarnival.com, which is also the name of my website, where you can find my newsletter, and contact information there as well.
Awesome, awesome. I love that handle.
Fun.
Yeah, where can people find you?
So I'm most active on Instagram and Threads as well, under at Alethea Lyons. My website is alethealyons.com, and that has my newsletter and some more stuff about my books. And yeah, I'm happy for people to ask questions, have a chat, and always happy to meet new readers.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, where can people find you?
Yeah, I am also mostly active on Instagram. I think I have like a presence across most platforms with like the same username. It's my name, Julie Liu, but there's underscores on either side. Yeah, happy to like connect. My website is julieliu.com. Also have a newsletter that I, just write like random thoughts in my head every month. But yeah, like always happy to connect and continue the discussion. And this has been such a wonderful time.
Yeah, it really has been. At this point, I am going to go ahead and turn this over to questions. This is a pre-recording, so we're all going to awkwardly wave goodbye, but thank you so much for joining us today, and look forward to talking with you guys. So bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.